Well, I'm Pastor Danny Davis, and along with my wife Robin, we're here today as we are every Monday through Friday to talk to you as Christians about things that people write us about. Now, we receive I don't know how many letters, 40, 50 letters a day here at the prayer center from people that are battling with different problems in their life. So we usually, as we drive here to the prayer center, we talk about things that people talk to us about, and then we come back from a biblical perspective and we try and share with you solutions to your problems. Now, you know, one of the young men that works here at the prayer center, he brought up something to me today that I think is very important. He said, you might want to talk about the fact that young people are turning away from kind of a promiscuous lifestyle statistically right now, and they're heading more towards solid relationships, and that's true. It wasn't too many years ago, Robin, that the divorce rate, if you were a Christian, not too many years ago, the divorce rate was that you had a 52% chance of ending up in divorce. Now, that was more than half and half. But that statistic has dropped just in recent years. Like the young man that mentioned to me was saying, people seem to be turning more toward biblical, more conservative biblical approaches to relationships. And
and that's funny you mentioned that, because I was just talking to my niece, and she has several friends and that have decided and have set sexual boundaries in their relationships and have chosen not to make that part of their relationship. And so
talk about young people that are dating.
Young people that are dating, exactly. Yeah. So it's and they're 23 years old.
Yeah. Well, it's actually an encouraging sign that young people are turning back toward the gospel, whether they realize it or not, and toward what the Bible teaches about relationships. Now, especially from the standpoint of marriage, and that's what I kind of wanted to talk about today is setting parameters for your life. And a lot of people that write us, they talk to us about troubled marriages. They're Christians that write us every day, talk about problems in their marriage, communication problems, and often a wife will write and say, I know my husband's cheating on me. Every sign is there. And so I want to take some time today to talk to people about setting parameters in relationships. And there's a lot of different, we have to look at the nature of the devil. What is the nature of the devil? Well, he's the author of confusion, the Bible says. The Bible says Satan is the author of confusion. So if the enemy, folks, listen, this is important for you to hear this. If the devil can get in your marriage, and he's a divider, he comes to divide and bring confusion into a relationship. If the enemy can get in your relationship and put a wedge there and bring division into your marriage, he can destroy your marriage. Of course, the devil hates marriage. It's one of God's original institutions, actually, from the very beginning. It's it was his original institution before government or anything else, was the sanctity of marriage. And I got thinking today, Robin, about how people allow boundaries to come down in their relationships.
Right.
And I think a number one thing, just from reading people's letters, that causes marriages, Christian marriages, to fall apart is when parents start interfering in marriage. And in Matthew 19 and verse 5, here's what Jesus said. Jesus said, in Matthew 19 and 5, Jesus said, when a man marries, he is to leave his father and his mother and be united unto his wife. Now, there's a lot of young men that get married these days, but they don't actually leave their mother. They're at home saying, you don't iron like my mother irons, and my clothes don't look like my clothes looked when I lived at home with my mother. And there are a lot of young men that get married these days. They don't cut the umbilical cord.
Right.
But Jesus taught in Matthew 19:5, when a man marries, he is to leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife. And that isn't just about physically leaving your parents' home. It's about cutting off those conversations where if a mother or father calls and you're married as a young man, they begin to say, she's not doing right. That's not right what she's doing. And then you're going back, a young man's going back to his wife saying, you're not, you didn't do that right. Even my mother said you didn't do that right. And I'm thinking of a young man that used to go to our church in California who was a police officer. And he had a relationship like that with his mother. His mother was eternally sticking her nose into his marriage to his wife, and they had 4 or 5 children. And but the mother was eternally interfering in their marriage. And biblically, in Matthew 19:5, Jesus said, when a person is married, they're to cut their parents off from a standpoint of they're to leave their father and mother and be united to your wife. So you become one flesh. And there's no room when you become one flesh for parents to be putting their 2 cents in and telling you why they don't think your spouse is doing the right thing. And I've told you this, you've laughed about it in the past, but my mother, when we got married 31 years ago, of course my mother's in heaven now, but my mother, if I had ever gone to my mother and complained about you, if we had an argument or something, my mother, of course, would have taken...
Would immediately take your side.
Of course, yeah.
Which that's
human nature.
That's a human nature, correct.
Yeah. My mother, if I killed somebody and went and told her, she would have said, well, son, you must have had a good reason. And she said, can I help you bury him? That would have been kind of the way my mother would have approached that. So you have to, the number one thing you got to do, if you're going to establish parameters in a marriage and have a healthy marriage, I would say number one thing is cut the parents off. I mean, not cut them off from a standpoint of not talking to your parents, but it's nobody's business.
Correct.
If you're having a debate or a problem in a marriage.
That should be worked out between you and your spouse.
You're one flesh.
Right, and not between your mother, your father, and your spouse.
Right.
Because then, of course, either side, there's not going to be a neutral party. I mean, it's just, it's hard to do when your son or daughter is sitting there and they're telling you what a dirty, rotten scoundrel he is or she is, you know. And of course, who are they going to, like you said, human nature is going to make you want to pick the side of your child.
Of your child, of course,
right?
yeah.
And so that's why it's never healthy to get a parent that, or for that matter, not only a parent, but maybe a sister, a brother, even your friend. And I understand we want to go and tell our friends about our relationship problems, and we want to go to them and we want to vent to them, but we have to be extremely careful, because not only are you probably their friend, they're also a friend with your husband or your spouse or vice versa.
Well, let's jump on that for a second. So not only can you have parents interfering, which Jesus strictly said you're to set a boundary there in Matthew 19:5, but you can have siblings. Now, you don't have a sister, you have 2 brothers, but I had 3 sisters. I have 3 sisters, and my sisters are as thick as thieves. I mean, they're on the phone to each other. It's been that way for as long as I can remember.
Right.
And so if you've got a sibling that, say you're a woman and you're married, and I don't buy all this stuff. A couple while back, I was sitting in a restaurant with them. I think they were trying to impress me, but they were saying, oh, Pastor, you know, we're so in love. We never fight. We've been married 30 years, and we never have had an argument. And I mentioned it on one of the podcasts we did here. I said, I sense I could smell a cattle yard off in the distance.
Exactly.
Because you're not going to be married to somebody without hitting a spot where you have an argument or have a dispute, and you can walk away from that relationship angry at that person. That's very normal. So I think if we're going to mention men or women calling mommy or daddy, we need to mention calling siblings.
Right.
Because, of course, a brother or sister, they're gonna have an open ear if you're having a problem.
Exactly. They're
But-
not a neutral party. They have something. There's something in the game for them.
Right.
They're on the playing field as far as your blood to them. So it's hard for them to try to stay on a neutral realm of what when you're talking to them. So it's never a good idea to.
It's not healthy. It's
No,
not
it's
healthy
not.
to
Yeah.
talk to family about your marriage. I just don't. I really don't think it's anybody's business except a couple's business, or if they're having problems, maybe a spirit-filled Christian counselor.
That's what I was just going to say. That if you want to talk to anyone, I would talk to your pastor. Talk to your pastor. Talk to some counselor or somebody that is at your church, or
and somebody
you know,
that doesn't tell your business all over town.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's another thing about calling a sibling if you're having marital problems. Of course, it's a no-brainer. That's at that point, whatever your problem is, it's going all the way through your family because.
Right, because how do you know that they're not going to say something? Something happens, something arises, and something happens, and you have some Christmas party or some family gathering, and you end up showing up late because something happened, and it was completely nothing that you were having any marriage issue or anything like that, and all of a sudden, the sibling, because I've seen it, and I've heard it, and it happens. They run over to the parents and say, you know, Linda's been having trouble with Bill, you know, so that's probably what's going on. They're probably fighting right now. She called me on the phone. So, yeah.
So I think we've established then,
Right.
if you're married, you got to cut the umbilical cord. You can't be telling your parents every little problem you have in your marriage. Certainly shouldn't be telling your siblings. And now I'm going to bring another group of people in. I think when you talk to friends, even if it's just somebody you're close to as a friend,
Right.
there's always going to be somebody that if you're upset, and I'm thinking of, I'm not going to even bring any specifics into this situation, but I'm thinking of a pastor and his wife that were having trouble, and the wife befriended a couple of ladies in the church, and
Yep.
of course that
I know
wound
what you're
up
talking about, yeah.
that wound up causing chaos in the church because, of course, those ladies talked to other people in the church, and I'm sure the pastor's wife felt like she needed to talk to somebody,
Right.
but you can't, if you're having marital problems, you can't bring friends into marital problems because a friend, of course, has a prejudiced opinion
Right.
of a relationship because if a wife is talking to a friend or a husband is talking to a friend, they specifically like that person, and so they can become the foolish person in a relationship that destroys a relationship
Right.
because they're going to tell you whatever you want to hear,
Yep.
and that's why in Proverbs 13 and 20, the Bible says a companion of fools shall suffer harm. So when you begin to talk to friends, oh, well, they have an open ear, they listen to what I have to say. Not only does that cause marital problems, but a lot of times it causes adultery in a relationship. If you begin to cry on someone's shoulder, of course they're going to be all ears, but that person can wind up being the person who the devil uses
Exactly.
to
No one of the, and I don't care what anyone says. Don't even try to convince me. Don't even try. If you are a woman and vice versa, if you are a man and you are having relationship problems, do not, I'm going to say it again, do not run to someone of the opposite sex and lean on their shoulder and talk about how your wife or your husband is a dirty, rotten scoundrel. Because I am going to tell you right now that what's going to happen is that person is going to agree with you. Don't tell me they're not going to, because they will. That person is going to agree with you. And what they're going to do is then you've developed what's called an emotional relationship with that person because you've opened up emotionally to that person. And then what we can go into is not only you have begun an emotional affair, and don't tell me I'm wrong. I've seen it happen with people. You begin an emotional affair. That is a bad boundary and a bad precedence to start your relationship. So going to your workplace, and we're even talking about marriage, we're talking about family boundaries, we can all talk about workplace boundaries. Do not, if you are leaving the house in the morning, you've had a knockdown, drag out fight with your friend, don't go to Bill at the cubicle next to you.
Well, I would say more so than your friend, your spouse.
And your spouse,
Yeah.
and talk about what a rotten devil they are, because eventually that person you're going to start beginning to have an emotional, they have no business, they don't need to be involved in your relationship. So if you are doing that, stop it. Don't do it.
Let me zero in on that, because I think you brought another good point up. We've talked about how the devil can use parents to interfere in a marriage, and then we went to the next level and we talked about how the enemy can get in a marriage and destroy a marriage through sibling interference. When you're crying on a sibling's, when you're talking to a sibling about your trouble in your relationship. So then we took it to a third level. We talked about how friends can interfere in a relationship, and a friend, of course, is going to always side with you because they're your friend. So you can't be telling friends about problems you have in your marriage. Then you just brought a fourth one up, and that's job associates. Now, I'd like to say a few things about that, because you know, we live in a time when, I think I studied it a while back, 70% of all married couples, just to, you know, we're in inflationary times right now. I almost want to say in recessionary times, but 70% of couples today that are married, both members of the marriage, husband and wife, have to work a job just to pay their bills. And some people are working more than one job, and the spouse is working a job just to pay their bills. So here's what happens. Let's say you're married, and you have an argument with your husbands, ladies. Okay. So you don't work it out that day. You go to bed angry, and you get up and you go to work the next day, and there's this nice-looking guy that you work with who always is so complimentary to you. And I'm going to bring a little point up here that it's nothing spiritual about this. Some of you aren't going to like it because I'm a pastor saying this, but men are dogs. That's just the truth of the matter.
Well, let's be honest. Some women are dogs,
and some women are dogettes. They are.
That's not. We're going to
men and women.
Right.
They're
men and women.
Yeah. There's not a spirit of on people these days of sanctity toward marriage. And so now you've gone to work and you're upset, and that person who's always so complimentary to you, whether man or woman, either one, I think it makes sense either way. Oh, are you all right today? You seem like you're just sad. You seem unhappy. Well, no, I'm fine. No, there's something wrong. I'm your friend. What's wrong? Well, I had an argument with my spouse, and you know, if I were your husband, if I were your wife, you'd never experience something like this. I would treat you like a princess.
And right there is when you shut it down.
There should be a boundary established right there.
You shut it down right there, and you tell them, well, thank you so much for your concern. You have a nice day. I got to get to work.
Yeah, but this is where I think so many marriages wind up on the rocks, because you have to, these days, both husband and wife have to work 70% of the time, I think is what the statistic is. And so it doesn't matter who you are, unless you're a person who's prone to not telling the truth and you pretend otherwise. At some point in your marriage, you're going to hit a rocky spot where you're arguing, or you're not on the same page, and you're butting heads. And so you go to work. Here's somebody who doesn't have any respect for marriage, and they begin to whisper in your ear and say, you're this and you're that, and if I were with you, I would never treat you like that person is treating you. So before you know it,
all lies.
Of course, people tell you. As far as men go, especially when men are telling women things like this, they're not interested in a relationship. They're interested in a $49.95 trip to the Motel 6. Let's just cut through the crap and be truthful.
Tell the truth. Yep.
When men begin to compliment women and tell them how beautiful they are and how they
There's an
feel,
ulterior motive.
there's an ulterior motive, and they're after a night at the motel.
And the same, and vice versa.
And vice versa.
And
Same
vice versa.
It's the same.
There's some women that do the same thing. They're right on the shoulder of a man that they're working with, or someone telling them, "Oh man, I wouldn't do that, man. I'd be up at 5 a.m. making you breakfast before you go to work, making sure you got a full belly before you head out the door."
Oh, they'll tell, yeah,
Lies.
and
It's lies.
and not only that,
It's all lies.
there are women that prefer an adulterous relationship because there's no strings attached. They know the guy's not going to get in their way because he's got a family to lose, and so there are a lot of women that will enter in an adulterous affair because they can do their thing and see whoever they want, and they know that guy's not going to argue with anything they're doing because of the fact that he's got more to lose than they do. So there are women that have absolutely zero respect for marriage that will, ladies, there are men that will fool around with your husband in a heartbeat. They've just got to be truthful with you.
Yeah.
And so you have to recognize that this is another group of people, job associates, that you have to establish parameters with, and you've got to establish boundaries with. And so I think today what we're talking about, Robin, is these are things that destroy marriage. Parents interfering, friends interfering,
Right.
siblings interfering, and job associates that you may have to be with 8 hours a day, and there's become a closeness, or as you called it, an emotional
Affair.
People that get into emotional affairs, and I don't really think God sees a whole lot of difference in emotional affairs and physical affairs,
Right.
because emotional affairs are still. You're still cheating on your spouse. You just haven't done it with your body yet.
Right.
And so I think boundaries are important. Now you've done a lot of studying on boundaries, Robin. So I want you to go ahead and share whatever you're thinking about today.
Well, I know that some people that don't have boundaries, some people that struggle with having boundaries, there's this desire for control. Some people use boundaries to manipulate each other. So, some people might use a boundary as far as like they stonewall in their conversations, meaning they're just not going to respond to you. They remain cold and remain silent, and they're refuse to engage with you until you get what you want. That is not a healthy boundary. When you have boundaries, you communicate your feelings, you clarify what you want, you set those parameters clearly with that person in your relationship. Some people don't want to set boundaries because they don't like fear of rejection. They don't want to be rejected. If I say this to them, if I tell them, I don't want to do this or I don't want to do that, they're going to reject me. Well, if they can't respect your boundaries, there's the door. Bye. Don't worry about fear of rejection. If somebody actually respects you and loved you, they will respect your boundaries.
Well, and this is something too. I think that it needs to be discussed. I really think when the enemy's trying to destroy a marriage, it gets over in the area of the demonic, and a lot of times I think there you have a wife that maybe has had, and we discussed this back a number of months ago. I don't remember the gist of what we're talking about, but you have someone that may have had abuse in childhood or insecurities that go all the way back to childhood.
Right.
And I really think that these things get over in the area of the demonic, where the devil will use something in a woman or a man's past where there's a propensity or a tendency to lean toward a relationship outside of your marriage, and the devil will actually use a person to zero in on that. A lot of men do that.
Well, what the thing is this is another thing that I found was the fact that, so it depends on how you grew up. Like maybe there's a lack of in your childhood you had a lack of experience or setting boundaries, and so what ends up happening is you grew up surrounded by those people with that have set poor personal boundaries, and they couldn't manage the ones they had. It was challenging for them to do that. So what they feel is they can go ahead because they don't have and haven't been showed those boundaries as they've been growing up. What they do is they end up invading your personal space, and and so you have to be very careful, to make sure that those people, especially depending on how you grew up and the things that you went through, they don't understand those boundaries. So you have to be very clear on that.
Well, there was a song back in the 60s, I don't remember the group that recorded it. It was called The Rapper. Rap, they call him the rapper. And the song was about this guy that would talk his way through one woman after another. He could get, if he could get them off to themselves. The rock song was about how he could wrap them right into bed. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
I really believe if and you have to recognize if you have had abuse in your childhood or insecurities in your childhood that have followed you into adulthood, and let's say you work a job. Let's say you're a woman and you work a job with a man that's got this a spirit on him, which so many men do, and vice versa, as Robin said. If there is a weakness in your emotional character, that demonic spirit in that person is going to zero in on that.
Right.
They're coming after you, and they're going to begin to talk to you until they have already zeroed in on the vulnerability, and of course they're going to take advantage. And so the thing becomes spiritual on so many levels, whether it's parents interfering in your marriage, or friends interfering in your marriage, or siblings interfering in your marriage, especially job associates that are interfering in your marriage. I believe it becomes spiritual because the enemy is using whatever one of these groups, person from any one of these groups you go to, if you're having any kind of marital problems, or maybe you're not even having marital problems. The Bible, in the Garden of Eden, the Bible talks about Satan coming to Eve, in the garden as a snake. And he begins to reason with her. He said, well, why don't you take a taste of that apple? Oh, no, God said we can eat it from any tree here in this garden, but we're not allowed to touch that tree. And Satan says to Eve, he worked on the woman. The Bible calls the wife the weaker vessel. And he said, you'll surely not die if you take a bite of that apple. And so before you know it, Eve's eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Well, that comes into another problem with people that struggle with unhealthy boundaries is people pleasers.
Yeah, that's true
People
too.
that are overly agreeable. They are eager to please other people, and they'll sometimes make you do things you don't feel comfortable in doing. And sometimes you overcommit yourself to something because you're afraid to set a boundary and say no. The hardest word in the English language for people to understand is no. N-O, no. People don't like to be told no. But you have to say no sometimes to set healthy boundaries. So because you're a people pleaser, you have overly involved yourself in in activities just because you want someone to love you and accept you.
Well, and then I think in the last 20, 25 years, 30 years, most certain, probably, the problem has arisen. Everybody runs around with a little telephone in their hand.
Yep.
And that telephone used to, before the day of smartphones and all of this, the telephone used to be a way of contacting a person if you needed to talk to a person, but today, a telephone has become a social media tool, and it's very, very easy for you to privately talk to somebody, and a spouse will never know about it.
Nope.
And so I think there's a lot of unfaithfulness that's taking place in marriages today because of social media. And like you said, a lot of times it may not be physical yet. It may not be a physical relationship, but it has become an emotional relationship. And when a person begins to talk to someone else rather than their spouse, confide in someone else rather than their spouse, cry on someone's shoulder rather than their spouse, Well, we got to go back to what Jesus said in Matthew 19:5. When a man marries, he is to leave his father and mother and be united to his wife.
Right.
And another place it says they become one flesh. And so the only person that anybody that's married ought to be talking to is their spouse.
Right.
Or as you said, a counselor or a pastor.
And you brought up the social media. And let me tell you one more thing that people struggle with healthy boundaries. These people are people with a low self-esteem. People with a low self-esteem, they set things, they prioritize what other people want instead of what they want. And so I see it on social media all the time. People, if they had any esteem for themselves, there's some things that I see on social media you wouldn't do. And the reason those people do those things is because they're seeking attention and approval from somebody else. They want the attention, they want the approval, and that is not a healthy boundary to set, because that just makes, when I see that stuff on Facebook, I think to myself, you're easy, you have no morals, you have no, all those things. And there's several boundaries that we can get into. There's physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, financial boundaries, there's, you name it. There's boundaries that we could continue to talk about today. But do things to build yourself. If you start setting boundaries, you will notice once you start saying the word no to somebody and say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that, or no, I feel uncomfortable doing that, I'm gonna have to say no to that. You'll start feeling and building a confidence within yourself, realizing, hey, I just stood up for myself. I just told someone and vocalized how I actually felt.
And I want to, we're about to run out of time here, and we'll have to pick this back up on Monday. But and that's another thing. There's so many things in marriage that can produce a root of bitterness. And I just thought of a boundary that couples have to come into agreement on if they're going to have a successful marriage, and that's financial boundaries. Now,
Right.
I was thinking about a young lady that worked for us, and her husband in California before we came here to Dallas, Texas, and her husband, it wouldn't matter what he made. He would go out and take a credit card and run the card up and spend everything he made and $1,000 more.
Exactly.
It's like he had no concept of finances.
Yep.
And I think in marriage there has to be financial boundaries to where,
Exactly.
because you can get a root of bitterness if you're working and working so hard, and then you've got a spouse that takes the money and runs out and heads to the shopping center.
Right.
After a while, you're going to begin to feel like, well, what's the point in trying to get out of debt? They're going to blow every dime that I make.
Yep.
So now you got a root of bitterness in your marriage because of the fact that one of the partners doesn't have financial boundaries. And I think that couples have to come together and even get on the same page concerning their finances, because I think I read the number one cause of divorce is financial problems. Problems. It wouldn't be finances, because if you got finances, you probably...
Well, it'd be financial problems.
I say the same thing as finances, but it really is financial problems. And where are those problems coming from? They're coming from not being on the same page with your spouse. Yeah. And so I know, I try anyway. Before I invest any large amount of money, I always ask you what you think. Right. And vice versa. I've noticed you do that with me, because I don't want money I spent to become a root of bitterness in our relationship. Yeah. If it puts either of us or both of us in a bind. And so you got to make sure that you establish even boundaries concerning your fiscal spending in a relationship if you want your marriage to work. Now, we're going to come back and pick this up again Monday, but there's in closing, there's a few things I want you to, if you will, Robin, fire these things out to people, let them know they can help us to, get the word out to more people through social media.
We are on every day, Monday through Friday, 11:15 Central Time, 12:15 East Coast Time, so that's lunchtime. And if you're on the West Coast in California, that would be 9:15. And we also want you to like, share, and subscribe. Whatever social media platform you are watching this podcast on, like it, Share it, subscribe. If you are on YouTube, you can also share the link in an email or a text message to someone from YouTube. But get the word out and let people know that Pastor Robin and Pastor Danny Davis are on every day at 11:15, 12:15 on the East Coast, 9:15 on the West Coast.
Yeah, it's very important. So if you can help us grow this thing, we're just trying to help people along in their walk with Christ. And hopefully what we've shared with you today has helped you in your marriage. We're going to pick up on it when we come back to you on Monday. And so until then, I'm Pastor Danny Davis, and as we always say, whether we're on television or on radio or on social media doing a podcast, go with God.
And God will go with you, my friend.